This podcast is presented to you by Angie Taylor, founding trustee of Land Bountiful Ministry, a private ministerial association. Land Bountiful Ministry is a private ministerial association with its own rules, terms, and conditions. Participation is conditional on membership of Land Bountiful Ministry. All information provided in this podcast is specifically created for private members of the ministry only. All content is offered for consideration, educational purposes, and private use only, and is not intended in any way to replace appropriate advice from appropriately qualified professionals. Each member is to discern for themselves the suitability of any and all information with regard to their own self and circumstances. Choosing to continue to listen to this podcast means you agree to be a member of Land Bountiful Ministry. Hello and welcome to your Fairy God Mentor. This is the show that inspires, encourages, educates, and supports expectant women seeking to experience unhindered, undisturbed physiologic birth, women ready to heal past emotional wounds surrounding birth, and women on a journey to create balance for herself and her family. I am Angie Taylor, the mother of 9, with 2 degrees in natural health. I am also a birth insider, knowing the ins and outs of the birth industry and all the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have worked with expectant women and their sweethearts since 2003 in a variety of roles, including childbirth educator, birth doula, home birth midwife, breastfeeding support, and life coaching. Sit back and enjoy hearing about all the things you never knew. Today I interview Cheri Timko, who is a couples relationship coach. She teaches couples to use straightforward relationship skills so they can truly be happy together. She has been happily married for 20 years, and she is also a veteran psychotherapist and homeschool mom to 3 teenage daughters. Welcome to this brand new episode of Your Fairy God Mentor. I am Angie, and today I will be speaking with Cheri Timko from Synergy Coaching. And I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Thank you, Cheri, for being here with me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So share with the audience first what it is that you do.
Well, I am a relationship coach. I have been working with couples in some form or fashion for over 20 years. And I help them have a really extraordinary relationship. My latest version of this is that I work with women who want to level up their relationship and their partner's not really interested in working on that relationship with them. But that comes from this experience of working with couples and realizing that I really can work with one partner and help them make those same transformations.
Which is exciting. And I understand all of that. That's one of the things that I've been working on myself over the past year or so is making changes on myself, but also, as I have made those changes, I've watched my husband make changes, without me having to say a word. He has just started to make the changes to help bring us closer together. And we are a couple that our youngest is 13. So we're kind of staring the empty nest in the eye. And some people may laugh at that, but we've got 9 kids. And we came into our marriage with children. So we didn't start off this relationship with just the 2 of us and being able to spend time with just the 2 of us. We've always had kids in the house. So it's kind of scary what comes next for both of us. Where, are we going to still like each other when there are no kids around?
You have to learn those relationship patterns and interactions almost
Right.
from scratch.
Yeah. So what does it take to have a great relationship?
All right. Well, I tend to be pretty nuts and bolts about this. I'm a real student of relationships. So, what I have realized is that there are three systems that have to run well in order for a relationship to work well. And when they do, that natural love that you feel for one another, the generosity, the caring, that all then can flow easily. But when you have a kink in one of these systems, you're really kind of working against the flow of the relationship. So let me just tell you what those three systems are, and then we can go into them more if you want. The first is to have good relationship habits. So, those are the things that you do, usually every day, that these little touch points in the relationship that keep you connected and keep the relationship growing over time. Because they're habits, you don't have to put a lot of time or energy into them. They just happen automatically and you show up at the right time. The second system is that every couple needs a way to bring up a problem and work it through and get to a solution. And then the third system is that every couple faces times when they have hurt one another, when they've let one another down or just handled something poorly. And so they have to have ways of cleaning up messes when they happen.
Boy, I'm just right on target with you. Um, so what would you say are some of those relationship habits?
Yeah, I love these. They're so easy to understand, and you could decide today, I'm going to start using some of these and just make changes in the relationship. And the power of them always astounds me. So they are these tiny little things that you do with your partner that keeps you connected and makes you remember why you're together. And they're different from couple to couple, but I will give you some examples. The thing that always amazes me is that when I talk with couples, they always give me a new one. And these are the things that make you the couple that you are. So they're things like how you say good morning, bringing your partner a cup of coffee, how you leave when one of you leaves for the day, how you stay connected when you're apart, so like texting or a phone call. It's how you say hello when you guys get back together at the end of the day. It's talking to each other for a few minutes each night to find out about your day or eating a meal together or how you say goodnight. And at each of those, if it is a habit for you to interact at that time, it's an opportunity for you to make eye contact or talk to one another or have some meaningful interaction that then keeps you connected. And when you do it every day, it stabilizes the relationship, gives you security in it, and it continues to grow the relationship without taking a lot of time or energy to continue that path.
All really important things. And as you were talking, I was thinking back in 2015, my husband had been laid off for 6 months, and then he started taking up different contract jobs. So he was living and working in other states for like 3 to 6 months at a time. And these were the things that we stopped doing because he wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
And so we did start to have some conflict. He would come home and he would be nitpicky about the things that he could see that hadn't been done. And I'm like, dude, give me a break. Please don't bring your work home. We don't get to have you home for very long. So can we make it an enjoyable time? And so it created some friction in the relationship. And then last year, in 2018, we moved. He had taken a job in Oklahoma. And so we moved the family from Kansas to Oklahoma. Yay, we'll finally be together as a family again, only to have his employer send him to South Dakota on what was supposed to be a short work assignment, but it ended up being off and on for 2 years. So when everything hit the fan globally, he was still working off and on in South Dakota. But last year is when they brought him home. And that was when there was a lot of conflict because we had to relearn how to live together again.
Absolutely.
You know, we had to relearn how to be conscientious of each other, and not just during the hours that he was home, because he's now home all the time. He's working from home. So then it had to be him learning my work schedule, because I've always worked from home, not just being the mom of the family, but having my own home business. So, you know, him having to learn that when I've got a sign on my door saying that I'm in a meeting, then I'm in a meeting and it's not the time to come in and give me the mail, you know, just things like that. So having that situation, I can just really see the value of getting into the habit of those habits, and then also figuring out how can we continue on with some of these habits, as many of them as possible, should we have to be away from each other for an extended period of time.
Yeah, that's a great example of how the relationship habits have to adjust to the season that you're in. And you were just talking about the difference between living in the same place and not living in the same place, and how you'd have to have different habits. So being away, there had to be time when you could still talk to each other. And that might have been a scheduled time, or something in the day would trigger it. But a different season that is just as challenging is the change from not having kids to having kids, or having 2 kids, or having 3 kids. And then there's a different season when you have teenagers, because all of those things impact the relationship and that flow of it. So identifying those touch points and fitting them in and making them meaningful and unique to the two of you, that's what really keeps that relationship grounded.
So you mean that we don't just automatically transition from being the parent of a newborn to being the parent of a toddler to being a parent of a school-age child and a teenager, and then there's the transition that has to come as they become adults.
Yes.
And your relationship with them changes, and so your relationship with your sweetheart changes as you have different conversations. It's very, you have to be willing to be flexible and fluid when you're in any type of relationship, but especially in this most important one of husband and wife, and your plan is to be together long term for forever, is what most of us are have the desire of in our hearts, is to be together forever. So how do we stay connected in our marriage during all of those different transitions as parents, whether it's being a brand new parent to being a brand new parent of a bigger family, and even, you know, the different stages of our kids' lives?
I think that the trick is to be a little bit intentional and thoughtful about it, because when you first get together, you have lots of time and you can focus on each other in this very intense way, but that naturally drops off as other things happen. And then you move into these very intensive years. Like having a newborn is like all encompassing. So you have to think about where those touch points are and make sure that they're still enough and meaningful. And then as your kids hit different stages, it's so unique to your family. For some families, that newborn stage actually gives them more time together. And for other couples, they really have almost no time together. And that's true of every single stage. My husband lived out of town. He had a job out of town for 2 years, and he was gone for like 4 days and home for 3. And I was so anxious to get him back because I thought we will have so much more time together. And then he came back, and we actually had less time together with him living in the house than we did when he was out of state. And we had to, like, we knew that we had to make the most of that time when he was home. So it isn't always the way you think it's going to unfold. You've got to really look at it and see, how do we keep this relationship strong, and what are those habits that fit for each stage?
Very true. Very true. And I know when I teach childbirth classes and I take a moment to chat with the dad about how intense the first 3 to 4 months post-birth are going to be for both of them, but especially for her, with learning to breastfeed, with spending pretty much her entire day either changing diapers, calming down an upset child, or breastfeeding, if that's what she chooses to do. And that it is common for men to feel a little bit jealous. And so I just kind of drop that out there to give them a heads up. Hey, this is a conversation to have before your baby arrives. Have some expectations set, some understandings. How can we make sure he's involved, so that he doesn't feel left out? The simplest thing is for him to create little baggies of snack foods for her to grab as she's going to sit down and start nursing. But giving him that heads up that, hey, your relationship is about to change. There's this new person that is all about mom. And that doesn't mean that they'll never be about dad, because they do go through that stage where they're all about dad. But giving them that heads up. So do you have any suggestions, anything that you do routinely with couples that are expecting, or maybe they didn't even think about it during the pregnancy and now they're caught up in that busyness of being a new parent with a teeny tiny human that requires everything from mom and dad?
You said 3 to 4 months, and I thought you were going to say 3 to 4 years. I know. That was immediately what I jumped to. Well, I think the more that they can be thoughtful, intentional, and planful before the baby is born, the better that transition goes. But I also know that life happens and we don't always get what we expect. So that attitude of having that fluidness is really important. So yeah, thinking through, like, what is dad's role going to be? Is he going to take one of the feedings so that mom gets extra sleep and can function better? Or is he going to be in a support role where he needs to be making those snacks or bringing her a cup of tea or whatever? So thinking that through and thinking about the things that are going to give him that connection with the baby and that connection with mom. But also thinking about what are some anchor activities that they can have. For instance, is there a way that they could plan that in the morning they would have a cup of coffee and 5 minutes together? And if it means they need to have the baby right there while they have that, that's fine. But if they don't have to, or as the baby gets more independent, but that cup of tea together or coffee becomes that anchor to that connection between the two of them, so that even when it's hard, they still look for that connection there.
Totally agree. Yeah. Having those daily connections. And my husband and I, from the time we started dating, we still have date night once a week. And I remember our teenagers being very cognizant of that. And there was a weekend where they came to us, the three of them, like, okay, so this weekend is just jam packed with everything. So when are you two going to have your date night? And I thought that was very thoughtful of them. And that they were acknowledging in that moment that they could see how that date night was impacting our relationship, not just between my husband and I, but the way that we were then interacting with the kids, having that break from them, being able to just be the two of us. So it is really important. You hear a lot of people saying, well, your relationship with your sweetheart is more important than your relationship with your kids. And I think that there are some people that get that a little bit confused. There are times in which something's going on with the child and it has to come first. So how do you handle that kind of conversation if you've got someone who is in a relationship and the other person feels like, you keep putting me second, so you don't feel like our relationship is the most important?
Yeah, I want to reinforce something that you said about date night, because I think that couples who can have a regular date night, it is very powerful and keeps them much more connected. But I think people get a little bit intimidated by that, and they think, well, we don't have a sitter, we don't have money to go out, we can't get dressed up, we don't get to leave the house. And I think broadening that date night idea to date night is spending that uninterrupted time with your partner. So if that is 2 hours after you put the baby to bed, that's fantastic. If that is 15 minutes where you have that cup of coffee and that's the only time that you can eke out, I would still call that date night, even though it's not on the same scale. So just,
I totally agree. There was one night my husband and I snuck out. Well, we said goodbye to the kids, but we snuck in the back door and went upstairs to our room because things were tight, and we just watched a movie and the kids didn't even know that we were at home.
yeah, yeah.
So,
So to your question about feeling left out, I think one of the most powerful relationship habits a couple could have right after a baby is born is a check-in of how are you? And every day checking in with each other and just finding out where the other person is. Now, that isn't going to solve the whole problem. Obviously, there needs to be some time that the husband gets the wife's attention, even as she's dealing with a baby. But I think that when you add that check-in, then you have a better sense of, is this person really just totally preoccupied and overwhelmed by this new role? Or is this them not thinking about you? And I think when you get that repeated feedback that this is really a life transition and they're overwhelmed and there's just too much, then it's an opportunity to have that empathy for them. It's also a great opportunity to pass some things off that maybe aren't getting done. And when both partners are involved in actively embracing this change and what it means to the family, very often there's a lot less of that loneliness or jealousy that can come in.
totally agree. I can't tell you how many women I've had contact me in the weeks or months following the birth of their child, and they're just distraught. The house is always a mess. My husband comes home and he's grumpy because it's always a mess. And I asked him, I said, are you sure that that's why he's coming home grumpy?
That's a good question.
Sometimes they're just coming home grumpy because they had a bad day from work. I remember having that day, my husband walked in and he just kind of looked at me and he looked at the floor and there were toys everywhere. And I said, I'm sorry, it's just been one of those days. I haven't been able to do any cleaning. And he looked at me and he said, when I come in the house and I see the kids are happy, I know you've done your job. So it's sometimes we as women put the pressure on ourselves that, we've accomplished nothing because the house looks like we've done nothing, but we have been doing the most important work. So yeah, we have to stay connected through communication. We can't just assume that, someone is feeling like we're not doing our job or we're not pulling our weight. So having those conversations are so important.
I love that example. Couples are so different. And I sometimes fall into the trap that if I fill in what my husband means, he won't often correct me. So if he walks in and I say, oh, I'm sorry, everything's a mess, he won't say, I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about this. But if I just be quiet for a moment, he'll tell me what he's thinking. And so I wonder how often we as women just jump in with what we're wrestling with and what we would feel guilt about. And that may that may or may not be what our partner was thinking about at all.
Right. Right. Well, and I shared with you before, I'm married to an engineer, so he's all about the data. So when I do make a statement like that, he's thinking, oh, incorrect data. I need to give her the correct data. So
I bet that doesn't always go over the best either.
no, it does not always go over the best. But understanding who your husband is as a person, and I shared with our 17-year-old daughter the fact that you need to understand what he does for work as well, because they oftentimes bring that home, and we take it to mean, oh, he's demeaning, belittling, he's picking on me, whatever it is, when he's actually just bringing work home. Um, so my husband works with airplanes, so he's very meticulous about the details. And so there's a lot of times he'll walk into a room that the kids and I think look amazing, and he starts picking apart what's wrong. And it's just because that's who he is. That's what he does all day long. He looks at the little details. And with an airplane, we need them doing that. With our home, probably not the best thing.
That's exactly what I was thinking, that perfectionism. I want my airplane mechanic to be a perfectionist. Absolutely. I want him to find every one of those nitpicky details.
Right, right. But in the home, sometimes you just got to be okay with what is, and that there are those times during the year where you do get down and you do deep cleaning and you do become more meticulous, but that's not an everyday cleaning thing. It would take us forever if we were all to clean that way. So what are some suggestions that you have for couples as we juggle multiple roles, being the wife, being the mother, being the business owner, and for the dad being all of his roles?
One of the things that helped me a lot was to be crystal clear on what my priorities were. And I thought about my time in terms of pots, and each pot was kind of allocated a certain amount. And so I had to put some really strong boundaries around my work so that it didn't interfere with the other priorities that I had. Now, that was how I prioritized it. You can prioritize it any way you want, but being real clear about those priorities, it meant that anytime I had an opportunity, I ran it through that set of priorities. And it didn't automatically mean I said no, but it meant that I made sure that those other priorities were taken care of before I could say yes.
Right. So the family first thinking, how is doing A going to impact the family, whether it's my role as a wife or my role as a mother. That's something I have taken a long, hard look at as I've been a business owner. Being a home birth midwife, there was really no schedule. My family just knew mom's got to go to a birth. It's all on our shoulders to take everything. And sometimes I was gone for a couple of hours, and other times I was gone for days. Now that I am doing more life coaching and I'm back to doing childbirth education, and I do consult with some apprentices, they've got questions that they want to ask a midwife they trust. And I feel very humbled that they call me and that they trust me. But I have been really looking at that and saying, I don't want a 9-to-5 job, but I do want a Monday through Friday business. I want people to see that it is possible to have your own business. It is possible to have your schedule of work Monday through Friday so that you can have the weekends off and still have that balanced life. So, that's part of that juggling all of our different roles, like you said, the different pots. Some of us call them different hats. So remembering those things and how much of your time are you willing to give to those things? Very important.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to be so specific. My priorities were my kids, I do a lot with food and how we feed the family, and then work. Those were my three pots. And it was so specific that I had to run my business on 24 hours a week. And like that was it. There really was no extra time than that. The other pots needed the time. And so it doesn't mean that I didn't spend time with my husband or with friends or go on trips. It meant that those three pots had to have those needs met before I could, lay that down and say, okay, yeah, I can do these other things.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of people that don't do that. They don't really analyze their lives. It takes humility to look at yourself and say, what could I do better? Where could I be a better person? Where should I cut back? Where should I give more of my time? And especially when you're weighing all of that and the financial impact that it has. So it's quite the juggling act that we're all doing, right?
Yes,
Absolutely. So, but I think remembering that your family comes first. I had an apprentice that when I approached her and asked her to be my apprentice, she was just like, okay, but my family comes first. I'm like, of course, we're not going to be a high volume midwifery practice because we both have large families. I have 9 total. She has 7. And so that was where the majority of our time needed to be put. And so she was ecstatic about that. I thought I would never find somebody to train me who would give me that time with my family. So it's really important for us to know what our priorities are. Because then when people ask us questions, we know what the answers are.
right. Even as I'm having this discussion with you, I'm thinking of how I've just started a second business and my pots got all intertwined, and it is time for me to sit down and have that guiding set of principles that then I run that opportunity through to figure out if it actually works or not.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I've been, the joy of having your own business is that you can have those moments where you just sit down and reevaluate. And it's something that we all should do, not necessarily monthly, but, at least quarterly, and get an idea of where we are now, where do we want to go, and how is that going to impact our priorities? All very important things. Because I don't want my husband or my children to ever feel like my business is more important than they are. They are of the utmost importance. And so having that flexibility and understanding that, okay, this is the amount of time that I'm willing to dedicate to my business. These are the number of time slots I've got available for podcast interviews, for working with clients, and just staying within that. Those are my boundaries, which brings clarity, which brings less stress, right?
Yeah, bringing that back to expecting couples and having just had a baby, your priorities could be completely different. They
Mhm.
could be my relationship, my child. If you don't have a job, it could be my home and how I keep that. And so still having those priorities that let you almost kind of triage, like what is the most important thing at this moment? Because sometimes, it's hard to sit in a room that hasn't been vacuumed for 3 weeks because you've got that newborn that needs your full attention. But if you're real clear on that priority is that time with my child and then that time with my spouse and then the house, then it helps bring that into perspective of maybe I don't need to worry about vacuuming just yet. Let me make sure these other 2 pots are filled.
Exactly, exactly. And I like to point out to moms too that when we're feeling frustrated, that new tiny human feels that frustration. And so sometimes they're crying because they know we need to sit down and put our feet up and take a deep breath and just relax for a little bit. And so in their wisdom, they are creating chaos that forces us to take a break. And it's hard to surrender to that. You know, we feel like I'm the parent, you're the child, you're supposed to do what I say, but no, no, parenting is not about controlling another human being.
I don't remember even having that much ability to control things. Well, okay, my kids are teenagers and I still don't know how much control I have. I can get them to buy in, but they are still human beings who have their own personality and desires, and that may not coincide with mine.
That's right. That's right. So when it's important as a couple to have that conversation as well. You know, what is your parenting style? How were you parented? What happened when you were growing up that you want to make sure doesn't happen to our child, or that you want to make sure we do in our parenting? Because we are putting two individuals together and then just assuming that they know how to parent. There is no parenting book that fits for every child, every situation, every home.
Yeah. And especially those things that you absolutely cannot live with. Being real clear with each other about things that, if they happen, are crossing a line that's going to cause so much distress for you that it's going to just cause strife in the relationship. Having that discussion before the kid is there is so much easier than saying, oh, I can't live with that thing you just did.
Right, right, exactly. And if you don't have that conversation and you do start to see them doing things that you don't agree with, it's harder to start that conversation at that point. And then you wonder, can I really leave this person with our child? Do I really feel safe? You know, leaving this brand new tiny person in the hands of this individual. And that's true whether it's the dad asking the question or the mom asking the question. That you know, I don't want people to assume that mom's always the good parent, because it's not true. Sometimes moms are not the good parent, the dad is. But I do believe that a lot of that comes from us not having these conversations beforehand, you know, or thinking that, oh, it'll all work its way out and everything will be fine. No,
Yeah.
that's not a good strategy either, right, Cheri?
No, although as much as you plan, like you plan with your best intentions and then you pick up the pieces of the things that you missed, because you truly can't know what you don't know until you live through it. And then you're like, oh, this is what I didn't know. This is what I didn't realize we were supposed to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
And I think
one of the problems with situations is if you wait until it happens, then you're already upset about it. And it's really hard to calm down, find that place inside you where you can see the best in your partner, even though they just did this thing, and then talk about that in a fairly neutral way that lets you actually talk through that problem rather than getting stuck in the emotions that are flooding it.
mhm, totally agree. Oh, so much goodness here, Cheri. So much information for parents, whether they're expecting their first or they've already got 10. Lots of things for all of us to think about. Parenting has changed drastically, even over the last 20 years, what's acceptable and not acceptable as far as a society is concerned. But I think what is most important is not worrying about what everybody else will think, but being on the same page with each other. How are we going to best raise this tiny human in a way that lets them know that they are loved, wanted, cherished, and safe, and that they have the space to grow and flourish and be the human being that they were designed to be. So I very much appreciate everything that you do, because you help couples create that in their homes, that safe space for everybody to feel like they can truly be themselves.
That was a great summary. I will add one more thing to that summary.
Mhm.
The ability to see that what your partner brings is of value and is helpful to you in being a better parent, and that when they want to do it differently, that's not a sign of them going against you or trying to undermine you. They're trying to bring something to that parenting experience that you aren't prioritizing or thinking about, but that your child probably also needs.
I love that. Yes, because parenting is a partnership.
Yeah.
It's very important. So what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Yeah, going to my website, you'll see where all of my stuff is, including some resources. I have a walkthrough of how to think about these relationship habits and then start to use them. So that would be a good place to find lots of resources. The other place, if you want to come hang out with me, I spend the most time in Facebook on Facebook in my group. It's called Date Night Community, and it's to encourage couples to spend some time together. So that's the best
Oh, I
place.
love that. I'm going to have to get in there.
Mm.
Hopefully everybody's sharing some really great ideas, because, we've just been doing dinner and come home, or dinner in Walmart, or dinner in Sam's Club, or dinner in Home Depot. And I'm like, we need some variety. We need to change it up a little bit. So I will be looking for your group. So thank you again for coming. I really appreciate everything that you are doing. And, I hope that everybody listens to this, head over to your group and get added into that and reach out when they need support.
And thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation we've had today.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. To learn more about Land Bountiful Ministry, visit our website, landbountifulministry.org. To learn more about this week's guest, simply visit the description for this episode. And if you'd like to be a guest on this show, send an email to Angie at landbountifulministry.org.